السلام عليكم
Recording
جميعا.
in progress.
أود أن أرحب بكم في هذه الجلسة. أنا حسن الحاج علي أحمد. أود أن أرحب بكم باسم مركز دراسات النزاع والعمل الإنساني، ولنتناول موضوع التطورات السياسية والعسكرية في السودان وتأثيراتها المستقبلية. هذه الأحداث لم تشغل السودانيين لوحدهم.
Going to talk about this topic. This is not going to be something that concerns only Sudanese people, but also it concerns the neighboring countries, because the impact is not limited to the political sphere in Sudan. It also impacts other spheres as well. And this is very much apparent when it comes to the regional interest in the matter and the fact that this interacts with the situations that are taking place in the Horn of Africa, the GCC region, and other regions as well. So this interest is also shown and manifested in a number of platforms and attempts to put an end to the conflict taking place. And consequently, there are a number of questions that are being posed. Where is Sudan heading, politically speaking, and what is going to be the fate of all these platforms in finding a solution to what is taking place? And can there be a national solution in light of the polarization that we witness in Sudan and that the Sudanese people undergo, all Sudanese people? And in continuation with all the efforts that are being exerted by the center, and also if we link it to the previous sessions that have been undertaken in this regard, we have the pleasure to welcome a number of renowned Sudanese personalities that are very much interested in working on the developments that are taking place in Sudan and the impact of such developments. We have with us today in this webinar, we have Mr. Abdullahi Ibrahim, an emeritus professor. So he is a professor from Missouri University, the United States of America. Professor Abdullah is a known professor. He's known by everybody. He has authored many books, many articles in the Sudanese affairs, and we have with us also in this session, we have engineer Mohamed Faroog Salman, who is a civil engineer, and he's worked in the consultancy sector and project sector, and also he works with the alliance forces, and also he was a member of the Freedom and Change movement until 2019, and he has authored many writings in the Sudanese matter. And also we have Khaled Al-Tijani, who is an editor-in-chief, the editor-in-chief of Elhag newspaper. Mr. Khaled has also authored many writings, such as Al-Khiyar Sifr, which is a book, and also he has authored many studies about the Sudanese situation. We have a constellation of very important speakers who are going to be with us here in this session. We're going to give each and every speaker 20 minutes to intervene. So this is a webinar that is going to be broadcast live on the different media platforms, on Twitter, on Facebook, and YouTube. And we kindly ask the viewers who are following us and who would like to take the floor and pose questions. At the end of this session, we have a chat box for communication. They can write their questions therein. So now we'd like to give the first opportunity to Professor Abdullahi Ibrahim to start his intervention. Go ahead, Professor, in the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. I would like to thank you all. I would like to thank the colleagues as well present with us here today. We are in a state of war today. And I would like to go to an expression written by a Somali writer. He was writing a novel. So he faced what is called the writer's block. And when you find such a situation, you find yourself in such a situation, the solution was the character to use his pistol, and then the problem, the block, will dissipate. And it seems that we have reached a kind of a dead end where everything is closed, or what we call the writer's block. So when we talk about the case of shooting that is taking place, so it seems that it is an attempt to find these solutions after they reached a dead end. So how can we dismantle this situation and deconstruct the situation that we are facing? So we have had a number of situations that have taken place. And of course, I would like to quote here T.S. Eliot, the American poet. So we lived the experience, he said, but we missed the meaning out of such an experience. So this is the situation that we're undergoing in Sudan. Yes, we have an experience that is taking place that we can see before us in Sudan, but we do not understand what is behind it. Also, Einstein, what he said, if he had been given an hour to solve a problem, he is going to dedicate 45 minutes to diagnose the situation and 15 minutes to solve the problem. We do the contrary. What we do is that we try to talk about one initiative after the other, attempt after an attempt, in order to find the solutions that we would like to imply without diagnosing the situation. So if we would like to see a solution to the situation, to the problem that we are facing, so we need to think. We do not think altogether. This is the issue that we are facing. We do not think inside the box, let alone outside the box. So I would like to talk about a number of points. We could have been the best of all Arabs or the best of all Africans. Where does failure lie? So what is dividing us? So we have a number of writings, such as rewriting history. So we are not the ummah that should be brought into the community to find solutions to what is happening. So we are not thinking. We are not required to think. So we see what has happened, historically speaking. We are facing a very complex situation. So my colleagues, when I talk to them, my colleagues, when I talk to them, they keep on talking about history. The Inqad did this, the Salvation did that, and they keep on talking about history. And I tell them, yes, I can hear you, but this is a novel situation, a new situation that has come to the surface. Yes, we know what you're talking about. So if a foreigner comes as an inspector, they would come and say they have done this and they have done that. And this is the situation, they say. So that is why I tell them, let's look at this situation. We have an explosive situation. We cannot keep on talking about history because this is the past. This is something of the past. I do not say that it is not important, but this is one component in light of all what is happening on the ground. So this is something that happens to Trump as well. When we look at the liberals, they keep on talking about Trump and Trump and Trump. So one person, he tried to comment on this continuous coverage of Trump. He told them, is Trump in your minds without paying rent? Is he sitting there rent-free because you're covering his stories time and again? At the end of the day, we are trying to use history, keep on using history, and then it loses all its meaning. So when we talk about the Mahdiyin, during the Inqad or the salvation, they talk about the image of the opposition, this the story which is full of injustices and so on. But now, after the invasion of the rapid support forces, we see the Khalifa that had invaded the Khartoum, killed this and made that. So this is not good. So this is not going to be good neither to the Inqad nor to the opposition or those who support the rapid support. So this is a continuous usage and overusage of the symbolic dimensions of history. And this is a very dangerous weapon that is being used time and again. And this is what I keep on saying to the opposition. So we can work on what is happening. So we do not think. We boycotted thinking. I talk to my colleagues and I tell them each and every war ended with reconciliation. So this is why we do not think. So we're waiting for the Reconciliation Council or Center to intervene. So wars end with a victorious party and a defeated party, and you cannot just sit and not tackle the issue and not deal with it, waiting for a reconciliation council to come and find a solution to the problem. So these are wars, and this is the nature of wars, and we are no exception when it comes, yes, each war, and wait for the war to come to the phase where we have a reconciliation. When we look at the war in 1976, when we have had the attack of the mercenaries, this did not end with a reconciliation. And the same in 2008, if we talk about the civil war that took place back then, it did not end with a reconciliation. So all of these are civil wars that happened in the countryside, in the peripheries of Khartoum. And this is a new situation. So any precedents, the theory of war or history is not going to help you find a solution to the problematic that we are facing in Sudan. We do not have tools of analysis. So we concentrate on a number of things such as gender, such as race, and since the Communist Party left and was dismantled, so the situation has changed altogether. There is no analysis to what is happening. So when it comes to gender as a theme was reduced to a convention, the CEDAW convention. We no longer talk about a kind of a social dynamism that is taking place or an injustice that we see in the society. No, they just talk about a solution that exists somewhere in the United Nations through the CEDAW convention. And we see how it is implemented to the letter. And this is the solution that they found without resorting to any analysis. So the same when it comes to the coup or military coups. So one researcher said that the continuous attempts or attempted coups or coups that have taken place, this is the fact. This manifests the fact that we see the prevalence of male. So this is why we have had this situation, and this leads us to gender, and this leads us to other issues taking place. So that is why we need to have insights, useful insights. But when it comes to race, it is used as a means of extortion. So we have been deprived of all these social meanings, political manifestations that we used to see in Sudan. But now we concentrate on, this is Abdullahi, who is an African who has been, rejected because he is African. And now we have John Garang, the person who was rejected by the people in the north. So this was the situation. So this was the history, which is an attempt to directly use such kind of concepts. So we have also a case of eternal relations. So the relationship, for instance, with Egypt and also the revolutions that have taken place. So we used to be absent-minded when it comes to these eternal relations that we had with the people on the western border of Sudan. We never thought, we never tried to think and analyze what is happening. And now, as a result of this civil war, we started talking about people in the diaspora. We're talking about conspiracies. So from my work in Zanzibar and other regions in Africa, and when I talked about the doctrine of the Africans, there is another concept, which is Arabs in their relationship with the Africans, in the borders, in their relationship through the borders with the Africans. So this is one of the studies that was carried out. But it seems to me that there are so many risks and such matters were not successful. And as a result of that, we have seen the problem of the Azawad and also Central Africa. So that was my idea. I talked about what is called the Arab Age. So we try to avoid dwelling in such issues due to people, or to the fact that people talked about conspiracies. So when it comes to political science, there are so many terms, and particularly when it comes to African political terms, the drama of power and so on and so forth. There are so many concepts that have been tackled and studied by the opposition. And as a result of that, we have seen the opposition, and they did not know what they should do with such phenomena, which is the deconstruction that took place at the time. And because they thought that it was a corruption, and this leads us to a number of economists who started talking about concepts of corruption during the Numeri era. And countries, so they carry out acts of stealing and not corruption. Corruption is limited as a result of laws that exist, but when the state does not oversee and supervise the acts carried out by the Ministry of Finance, so this is thievery. So you enter into another kind of area. Even people who try to deconstruct the situation and read the situation, they talk about corruption. But this is not corruption. This is kleptocracy. It is different altogether. Because when you have states or acts of corruption, this can be sued to courts and so on. But this is kleptocracy. This is what we witness. Also, when we try to describe what is happening and what is being promoted, so they say that we have two generals that are at war. So, and this is something that is very dangerous, as if these two generals are carrying out a kind of a symmetrical kind of act, and we cannot compare a non-state military organization to the military. You cannot keep them on par. And we cannot just talk about war taking place between two generals. So all the misunderstanding is due to the fact that they keep on talking about a war between two generals. So they tried, as a result of the war that took place, there was some acts of circumvention that were carried out by the West, and we have seen a decision that was carried out, which is the democratic transition. This was promoted by Congress, and this democratic transformation included both the military and the rapid forces. And as a result of that, and irrespective of all that, the idea that remained is that both parties are having the same doctrine. So the military is targeting people and bombarding, and the same applies to the rapid support forces. So in English, we talk about what is regrettable and what is terrorist. So what a legitimate institution is carrying out is regrettable if this happens. But what the rapid support is carrying out is terrorism, because this is a kind of a bestial nature of what is being carried out by the rapid support. And it is different from the regrettable acts that are carried out by the military.
عندك 3 دقائق يا بروفيسور.
You have 3 minutes, Professor.
الجارية حكاية إنه الإخوان الكيزان أو الفلول يقول لك الشيوعيين عملوا الحرب.
The Muslim Brotherhood say that the communists did that, and the leftists say the Muslim Brotherhood has said, you don't have the energy, you don't have the authority to say these things. This is just in vain. Both sides are carrying out this war by omission and neglect, because you both took sides, you took positions, and you have the ability, the potential not to think. In my opinion, it's better for us to renew the discourse, the language we use. For example, if all the elements of nature start having an effect, the ultimate result will be calamity. I'll conclude by saying that it was reported that the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, when the situation becomes chaotic, then departing that land and immigrating away from it is the way out, is the exit strategy to come out of this very difficult situation. And he said, when war becomes prevalent, when strife becomes prevalent, when people start killing each other, this is the time he was describing. For this reason, the situation in Sudan requires us now to think, why is it that people are, somebody has to take up arms, calm the situation until we restore some normality. Thank you, Dr. Abdullahi. Now we move to Mohamed Faroog Salman. You have 20 minutes. Assalamu alaikum, and I'd like to welcome all those who are present with us. And thank you for a kind invitation. And I know the situation and the circumstances are very hard at the moment in Sudan, but I'm happy to be joining the other panelists. Can you please raise your volume a little bit? I have somewhat a different approach to what has been said about the liberty and changes approach. What we can see after the 11th of April is different. It's very important that we must take into consideration the success the liberty and change has affected. They had people who were successful, and also their methods were peaceful, we must not forget, and they also managed to do some good. But the liberty and change could not manage to be the leadership of the revolution. I am a bit keen to go back to the history, the recent history, not the distant history, to say a few words about the failure of the political transformation in Sudan and why the transformation to democracy has ended up in failure. There is a lot of talk about the new Sudan because old Sudan was very problematic. I'm not going to go back to 64 or 56. I'll go back as far as 2005, because for me this is a turning point in the political change which the liberty and change could not effect the change it desired, and it did not constitute a real leadership for the revolution, before the inner quarreling and strife within its ranks became apparent. The civil movement in both its leftist and rightist wings failed their duties. I'm very much interested in the period from 2005 to 2010 because it was the last time the traditional political, before 2005, it was different. After 2005, we reached an agreement and to start political change. There was a period of armed struggle, not the popular movement only, but the other movements, and we ended up in the 2002, or when the Darfur armed struggle began with the equality and justice and other movements. This transformation was left a big role to the political parties to play. But now, although we are hearing a lot of talk about the remnants of the former regime and this and that, from 2005 onwards, there was a political legitimacy of the incumbent ruling regime. And after the coup of 1989 was no longer called so, but the Sudanese political movement did not carry out its duties as was expected from it, and the political practice was either only destinations you reach. This is wrong. When you deal with things on the basis of them being like projects, when you work directly to deal with it as an ongoing project, from milestone to milestone, measure your success. This is normal for any political order. Even failure or success is change also in a way, and it should be taken into account. But this is something we cannot see in our own experience. After that period, the political movement has retreated, and the role of political parties was no longer the same as it was, and this applies to all of them. They were sort of exposed, all of them, with no exceptions, because the constitutional and legitimacy aspect changed the nature of the regime. And let's say Sudan as like New Sudan, Old Sudan, the Islamist movement, the popular movement, all these dichotomies, there was put aside, and there was some sort of an agreement on all sides, although the political movement did not fully take part in that, because after 2010, different faces came to the forefront. Some were younger, and sometimes there was a lot of violence. This was the first time, by the way, that the rapid support forces appeared on the scene. And what appeared in 2018 and then 2019, then the Sudanese revolution meant that new leaderships started appearing, which were not institutionalized, and Mohamed Jalal talked them the ghost leaders, not real leaders. And they sort of bypass some of the necessary conditions. This was apparent in those days. I think this is what made the political parties all became absent from playing their role, and they were, however, allowed later on to form their own alliances and coalitions. Unfortunately, they hindered some opportunities to achieve the interest of all, or the common interest. And here we have to look at the military doctrine of the state, of the government, since the events of Al-Fashir of 2005, and even in southern Sudan, when the military doctrine has changed, it became different before the separation of southern Sudan, South Sudan. For 50 years, the army fought in South Sudan, and all the wars they fought to keep the unity of the country had ended in separation. They did not fight this as the army of the North. This was the national army. There were some 20 or 30,000 members of the armed forces were from the South, by the way. And this is something which has created a rift in the military doctrine of the Sudanese armed forces. And I don't think this was taken seriously enough or dealt with as it should have been. Of course, this had a severe impact on our national dialogue and discourse in the North and the South. And the internal rifts and the threats to security became more apparent and more clear in South Sudan and now in the North Sudan too. Sorry, I muted myself. There is another important point about the political and the military aspect I would like to talk about, and the structure and how the community, how the people, the public can take part, and the entire society was involved, in fact, and this was one of the reasons why the border guards were established, which later became known as the Rapid Support Forces. And there was always a view that these forces, as friendly militias who are serving the interests of the army and the country. If we look at the tribal components, and this is also in some areas, this is a local interest which used to reflect the interest of these tribal communities in their own locality. And these are very important things. Some were of Arab descent, some were other of Arab descent. And sometimes the failure was blamed on the state, not on these communities who failed to defend their interests. Later on, the situation took a more dangerous turn when, for example, people started talking about the Third Republic or whatever that Ismail Darman just talked about. And this applies both to the North and the state in South Sudan when there is this bias. All these areas have gone through certain changes, and this was these forces, the rapid support forces, have moved from becoming friendly forces to the army, militias friendly to the army. They've become a source of threat to the very existence of the state. I agree partially with Dr. Abdullah Ibrahim's view of the army, but even the army, even when they committed some violations, they continued in 50, 60 years of history of war. They have committed violations, but we cannot say this was not the norm for them. This was within the context of the situation. Maybe this was something which was imposed on it because of the political attitudes prevalent at the time. And also, the revolution does not have a leadership until now. Al-Burhan claims to be the leader, Hamiti claims to be leader, there's Hamdok, there are others, but there is a lot of lack of originality in the thinking of these people. Now, the future now is being determined. Sorry to interrupt. You have 3 minutes. Yes, I'm going to conclude now. There is a song I was listening to a few days ago. He said that whenever there is genocide, there will always be denial. So to talk about this from certain points of view is just fruitless. And the war, if we look at the current political scene, and we know the responsibility of Hamiti. He started from the days of al-Bashir. Many concessions were given to him, but he continued building up his strength until the war broke out in April, because the concept of the state of 1956, even that has become a nightmare. We cannot deal with the war the way we are doing that. We can only end this war through restoring the peaceful nature of the revolution. The political forces failed to absorb and understand, and I think the most important aspect here is justice, and to what extent people uphold justice. And some say that the war did not reach Khartoum, so this is justice. But the society in Khartoum is the result of this war. There are 6 or 7 million of its inhabitants are refugees and internally displaced people because of the war. So this is a heavy burden that Khartoum had to bear, but this will not compensate for real justice that could be the way out, the exit. And finally, any denial of what's happening, this war has impacted everybody. Even the civilian sides now are engaged in a zero-sum game, unfortunately. I don't know why they're fighting each other. So much so that everybody has become a victim everywhere in Sudan and Khartoum and Darfur. No one can deny this. And the denial of the violations in South Sudan, in Al-Nour, in all areas, because this war we are witnessing now is the result of all these illegitimate violations and impunity that all parties have enjoyed. We have to reinvent new forms of power sharing, but all this talk about absolutism, which we've been repeating since 1956, is important. We should get rid of that, and so that we can live with the pains of this war and can find a way out. This does not happen through denying what has happened or what's happening now. Unfortunately, the road to peace knows no shortcuts. This is a long, arduous journey, and if one side is losing, it's better to tell them to stop it, because they have already lost with Hamiti, for example. And for Al-Burhan, there is a lot which can be said about his leadership and their neglect of their duty. I'm sure after this war, there will be a new concept of the state having a monopoly on using violence and power. And finally, I think our political party, similarly to the army, they did not deal with things in a clear manner. We have so many defects, and our civil agitation should have been dealing with things better. Thank you very much. Now we go to Dr. Khaled Al-Tijani. You have 20 minutes. Assalamu alaikum.
أحيي بروف عبد الله وباشمهندس محمد فاروق وكل الحضور. حقيقة يعني كما يقال يعني في ظل الوضع الراهن في السودان حديث وشجون يعني قضية.
So when we talk about Sudan, this is a very intricate situation, very complex indeed. The two professors talked at great length about such details. And when we look at the political and military developments that are taking place and their impact on the future of Sudan, so what we witness in here is the sound of weapons and rifles. As for politics, we do not see anything due to this kind of closeness in thinking. We have reached a dead end when it comes to thinking and politics. When the war started and erupted on the 15th of April, it was the result of an accumulation of things that have happened. And you thought that the elite and the political forces would be able to look into the humanitarian repercussions, and that would be an opportunity to rethink or to carry out a new attempt to revisit history and deal with the present with a new understanding. But in actual fact, after 10 months since the war started, and when we look at the political scene, We look at what is happening. We look at those who are supporting the military or those who are supporting the rapid support. We do see in both camps the continuation of the same thinking, which is trying to hide behind the rifle. This is a manifestation of the fact that parties are trying to align with one or two in order to make gains and support one of the two parties. Of course, taking into account what can be described as what is guaranteed. Of course, the military is no innocent when it comes to having political ambitions. But when we look at what had led to this war is a political conflict, and it had led to what is called a rift between the two parties, try to change the equations on the ground, and this has led to such an explosion. So what we witness here today is that there is no readiness, there is not even an intention to think differently when we look at the political literature and the different proposals that are made by the Change and Freedom Party or any other kind of movements. When we look at their literature, they all try to underline what has been the case prior to the situation now. They try to underline the view that they want the war to end and they do not want to see the other party in the equation that might take place or happen. So let's suppose if the war tries to reproduce the same kind of thoughts, which is the exclusion of the other, and this is one of the traits of the Sudanese politics, and this had led to the lack of stability in Sudan because people were not able to overcome the partisan differences and try to put aside personal interests and concentrate on public interests or the interests of the people in Sudan. So where are the people? They are not present. The political forces or the military forces themselves are making the people being impacted by what is happening. We do not hear the voice of the people. So why do we see an absence of the voices of youth? Why do not hear the voices of youth as it used to be the case during the revolution? Their voices are absent. We do not see any existence of the people after all this impotence, after all this presence that we have seen. All of this has become absent. So that is why everything is being carried out, everything is being managed through the two powers, because we see all those forces, all those representatives absent from the Sudanese scene. So we see lack an absence of reason, like an absence of politics, like an absence of thinking. This makes the two parties, even those who are calling for civil peace, are hiding behind the rifle, and they want to try to reinstate the situation as it used to be in order to make gains after the war is over. So when we say that the main objective is to end the war, but we see that parties are reigniting or continuously igniting this war through this alignment with one or two parties. So the situation has become an armed conflict, if we accept this description, and this is a war now par excellence against civilians in a systematic way. So that is why, how can we talk about a civil transformation, and how can we be able to transform the war from an armed conflict? So this has become a war against civilians, as we can see. can see the human cost. Many people have been displaced. Many people have become refugees as a result of this conflict. So it is very clear now that the priority is how to use this war in order to go back to the political power and not to stop the war. And so the same applies to the other party. The other party is unable to delineate a roadmap or at least to come up with a political act that can come up with new policies that would enable us to find ways to stop the war and to transition into a new phase. So are they waiting for the military to be victorious and after that have the power to move on and do something? And the same applies to the other party. So in light of this political vacuum and a vacuum of leadership, there wouldn't be any lessons to be learned, because we do see the same way of thinking that have led to what we are facing now in this war. And one of the most important problematics that Sudan faced after the December revolution is the inability to define the nature of transition. Yes, there was a revolution, but a revolution that was incomplete. So what has happened is that the political forces that were leading or presented themselves as leading this change, they were not able to continue with this revolutionary transition, and they were speedy in their establishing an alliance with the military forces instead of getting their legitimacy from the people, because they wanted to enter into a kind of equation with the military in order to share power through a kind of a constitutional document and enter into a partnership with them. So that is why they say that this military establishment had its own interests, and therefore they accused the military as well. So is the change? What has changed? We have the same people, but what has changed is the interests that link to the two parties. And now they attempt to talk about the nature of the army that exists and the situation and how it should be. So that is why the problematic that we are facing and what people are posing, they say, how can we exit such a situation? Can we do so by revisiting and keep on talking about the history, or keep on using the same models of discussion that used to happen in the past? No. So we should have a political process. All of these things have been tackled in the constitutional and legal documents. All of these documents talked about a unified army and that the rapid support should be integrated within the same kind of establishment, but the rapid support either refused or was rebellious when this was proposed. So on the one hand, they say that the rapid support is under the military establishment, and at some other instances, they say that it is under the control of the states. This is what we witnessed. That is why they see the alliance is in order to guarantee a certain kind of continuation and try to deal with this situation. So this is the main reason that has led to such war. So even what has been presented is a kind of a representation of the same kind of thinking to reinstate the rapid support from a political and military perspective, as it was the case in the negotiations that took place in the past. So this what has led to praising and awarding those who have resorted to weapons and not those who try to achieve the public interest of the Sudanese people. That is why lack and weakness of a national will, this has led to what we see and described as the increase in foreign intervention during this war. So unfortunately, we do not have any national initiatives that would contribute to any change in the environment that we see before us, and that has led to the change that we see. We see that all the initiatives are external initiatives. One of the problematics that we face as Sudanese since the Addis Ababa agreement, we see that all these settlements come from external powers, and none of these initiatives have led to any sustainable peace in Sudan. And consequently, so the absence of such thing has led to this situation that we see before us. So this is what the citizens are facing. So it is very strange. Up to now, after the December revolution, the constitutional document was developed through the African Union. And after that, we have seen the quartet's role and also the framework agreement that was developed. And unfortunately, even the state's institutions think that there is no solution to this issue unless external powers have a role to play. And those are not voluntary institutions that would help you. So each party has its own interests. But in general, if this is the status quo that we witness, and if we would like to find a certain kind of point whereby we would kind to find a solution, I think that the Jeddah platform gave us a kind of a practical way in order to find a solution to the armed conflict. I'm not talking about the political future of Sudan. So the importance of this agreement was an attempt to find a way based on certain principles and also based on IHL. And this is what is taken into account when we try to define conflict. And what is important is to take into account the concept of discrimination, which is different from what was concluded in the May agreement. So this not only an agreement that resulted from the negotiations that took place. So the agreement always underlined that there should be an attempt to implement the concept of distinction between civilians and belligerents and so on and so forth. So all the pledges, all the agreements were very clear indeed, and there was no doubt whatsoever as to how this is going to be defined and how this would lead to the protection of civilians. So the rapid support has changed this war from a war against the military to a war against the civilians or citizens. And as a result of that, we have seen so many violations. So irrespective of all the commitments, we have seen continuous violations of these pledges without any deterrence from the international community. There have been so many condemnations that have been expressed. We have seen that time and again, but what does it mean when you condemn if condemnations are not translated into pressures and also change in the behavior of the rapid support forces? These condemnations are just theoretical and are not translated into acts on the ground that would bind the rapid support to protect civilians as they have promised. You have 3 minutes left. The second thing that I would like to talk about, so we have to differentiate between stopping the war as a tactical procedure and any other kind of political process pertaining to the future of Sudan. This is very important, and also it was mentioned in the Jeddah agreement, and that there should not be any kind of political arrangements. And this is very important indeed. The military forces or components should not decide the future of Sudan, the political future of Sudan, because this should be done by the Sudanese people through the different mechanisms that should be undertaken. But unfortunately, what we witness through the civil tansiqiyya, they try to be party to such kind of process or negotiations, the military negotiations that are taking place, and this is going to give privilege to weapons over civilians, because if you call for a kind of a civil rule, this is going to lead to a kind of a mix-up between what is military, what is political, and this is going to reinstate the same problem. We have another issue which is known to so many of you that we see, because we see a failure because so many of those parties have stopped playing the role of the facilitator to this problem. And we have seen that so many of those attempts have reached a dead end. So the international community in the framework agreement did not mention the repercussions that might arise as a result of relying on weapons in order to gain political benefits. So we know that there should be a recognition that any modern state would have a party that can monopolize violence in a constitutional way. So this is a conflict between the presence of a state and the absence of a state. The last point that I would like to talk about and that we see in the literature around us, everybody is talking about civil reform, military reform, but we do not hear any political institutions reforms. We do not see this mentioned in the constitutional document or the political agreement, nor in the framework agreement or in the view or vision that was presented by the civil forces. So this is based on the precept that the problem lies in the other parties that should be reformed. In my view, that any peace to take place in Sudan can only start if we have a real political reform, and this cannot happen if we do not practice democracy. We cannot talk about a kind of a rule if you continue carrying out alliances and coalitions with military powers. In my view, if we do not have a strong process, a radical attempt to reform the situation, this is not going to lead to any tangible change in the political scene in Sudan. We'd like to thank the three speakers for their interventions. We'd like to thank them for their analyses when it comes to the Sudanese crisis. And now we'd like to move to the Q&A session. So we have our audience with us. We have three questions that have been posed. So there is a question that is posed to Professor Abdullah. The question, so how can we respond to those who say that the military should end the war unconditionally?
في سؤال ثاني
There
للباشمهندس.
is another question to Engineer Faroog. Can you explain how justice can establish a new situation? Do we need a justice that would lead to more divisions, or is the consensus comprehensive? There is a question to all three speakers. Do the belligerent parties have the intention to find a solution without any ambitions? There is a fourth question. So when we talk about the intervention of third parties that support Hemeti, isn't this a reason why they should have parties that would encourage to sit and negotiate? So we would like to start now. And we have a fifth question that is going to be posed. So we'd like to start with the first 5 questions with the same order. We'd like to start with the professor, and after that we conclude with Mr. Khaled. So we would like to start. Professor, the floor is yours. So the question that was posed about the military that should surrender because its performance is in the view of those who said that their performance is going to lead to defeat. Let them be defeated. So why are you hasty and you want them to surrender if you have decided that this battle should end in surrender? So this is not a kind of an appraisal of what the military does in terms of strength or weakness, but this shows that the military has no role, and this is based on a long, long history of what the military has done to us, for us, and the continuous grievances about the history of the military. And in light of that, we see that they should leave and dissipate. And and this is the situation that we see. So on the basis that you try to push the military to surrender, wars are not carried out on such basis. So maybe a city might fall or a camp can fall, but at the end of the day, resoluteness that Tijani talked about. So the resoluteness is based on the fact that we have a state. So we are now in between a state and chaos. And the position vis-à-vis the state is not that the military is not a pleasant thing. So the military is meant to manage violence and not sweets and pleasant things. So they have to manage violence because there was a great deal of violence that was carried out in the last 60 years. But the military is acting on behalf of the state. If the state is violent, then the military is violent. So the flaws of our political thinking, I have not seen. The state is based on what? Modern state. It is based on what? So we see that they are all soldiers. So the worst thing when it comes to the military is the idea, and the most dangerous thing that has happened, it is not that they're resorting to friendly forces. These friendly forces they have their own issues and problems in their own regions. The Nuer with the Dinka, they have had their own issues. But what is happening is the transformation of these friendly forces that used to carry out certain duties and leave and be dismantled. These friendly forces, such as the rapid forces, have been changed into a force, into a military. Even the Americans and non-Americans, they need the friendly forces, but the danger lies is making them a parallel military, as it was the case in Syria, in Yemen. So this is the point that we have to understand here. So the invitation is here. So that is why there should be, when we talk about the rapid forces and the military, both of them are striking, but this is different. Yes, the rapid support, they are striking because this is the nature of the beast. So there are certain people who try to call for the military to surrender through the use of many justifications. I'm going to give you the opportunity. So there are a number of questions with regard to justice and so on. Mr. Faroog. With regard to justice, so if there is any lesson to be learned from the past, the lack of justice is through war. So what we missed and was absent is the achievement of justice. So since the independence of Sudan and the establishment of the state, we have seen a number of violations, and this was not looked into. And I think that even matters of justice, this is not only relevant to the belligerent parties. So the commanders of the military should be held accountable for their negligence, and of course the other commanders as well. So when we talk about friendly forces who have their own interests and they threaten the region, they are resorted to in civil conflicts. And I think that this is the kind or nature of violence of the state that should have been limited and not expanded and invested in. Yes, there are violations that are taking place that should not be forgotten, but when we look at the history and the violations that have taken place since the incidents of 1955 in the south of Sudan and many other incidents as well. So we need to understand that the model of justice, this is what is called the transitional justice. This is something that should be understood by people. So when we talk about the transitional phase, we see that people become refugees and IDPs, and they talk about that this has been as the foundation for democracy, for the reconstruction of certain bases of the state of our living together. When we talk about transitional justice, this is also a kind of a constituent kind of component. I see the difficulties that people are talking about, but the continuation of the situation has led to the war. If there is a motivation, if there is anything that would limit that, and decide that the violations are going to be, the perpetrators would be held accountable and not forgiven. And this, when we look at it, so the crimes that are being committed in Sudan. And since the French Revolution, we have seen so many changes that we have been witnessed. And we're talking about something that dates back to 1600. So this can lead to the redefinition of international laws and also the properties that are being transferred from one state to another. So there are markets that are receiving all of these things. So this is not an easy matter. So that is why people, they scare us of wars. That is why they keep on saying, let's postpone the situation, let's postpone what is taking place. And they talk about the violations and what would happen if we concentrate on justice or insist on justice. We're not going to lose more than what we have moved. The discourse that says, let's reach a consensus, war can only end if we agree between ourselves, between each other, if we are committed to achieve justice. We're not talking about justice that is based on certain procedures, because we're talking about crimes that have been committed in public. And when we talk about procedural justice, that can perhaps explain the situation, but the situation is not like that. When we talk about transitional justice is based on the fact that perpetrators have remorse about what has happened, and therefore they want to start a new phase whereby the existence, whereby they would exist to coexist with others. So that is why the international community works on such kind of procedures. I think that our procedure is political, our conflict is political and social. That is why I have been describing the situation as not being legitimate. If we look at the rapid support forces, even if they start supporting the military, they will remain in conflict with the state. Yes, these forces have failed to support the military, and therefore they became rebels, fighting the people and fighting the state of Sudan. So, but when they failed, we have seen ourselves in a comprehensive war taking place in Sudan. So why not work together to make Sudan livable, to confront all the challenges that we have? So if we do not feel that that there is commitment, there is law enforcement, there is justice, we cannot put the war behind us. So the only way to do so is through procedures.
اي خطاب بتاع تسييس للحرب دي اذا كان في ذول عنده مشروع سياسي تقدر انه قائد حرب قانوني
everyone thinks from their point of view that they have the legal pretext to finish the violence of the state, the injustice of the state.
يا باشمهندس ممكن كلمة عن العدالة والحرب لو سمحت.
تفضل يا بروف، احنا نسمع منك طوالي في اي وقت.
في الحقيقة في معادلة ما بين
there is an equation between justice
اللي هو ترجمة لأوردر. المشكلة
and the word نظام in Arabic, which is the translation of order. The war is as a result of people who called for justice without consideration of the order. This started with the armed movement since the days of Garang. They called for justice. There is no problem with that. But they did that without considering what's required by order. When the revolution started and democracy came, they still continued continued calling for justice.
So when we look at what is happening, this was the result of a deal that was concluded with the military. If we look seriously at this war that is taking place, we have to resort to justice without taking into account the order.
تفضل يا باشمهندس.
Yes, go ahead, go ahead. I would like to clarify the concept of justice. So when we talk about the establishment of transitional justice, we have to talk about the context of the order in light of consensus of an authority such as the one we have. So when it comes to justice in its procedural and criminal perspective, justice, when we talk about it, in the last 9 months in which I have been in my house. So the way I reach my house, any settlements that would be established and reached would entail that there should be a number of procedures, because a settlement should create a level of commitment and not find ourselves that we're going to see a repetition of the same acts that have been carried out in the past. This is a very important point that we should not forget when we talk about the future. So let's reach a political agreement in order to reach a political settlement. Justice is a kind of settlement. Wars by nature entail that we should abide by international humanitarian law, and we should not resort to absolute acts. So the culture of commitment of justice should prevail during those wars. So that is why we have seen violence in the state. This leads to commitment, at least through the implementation of the law, and should lead to the birth of new constitutions, and also to put an end to the different cycles of violence. This applies to our state or to other states. This is the difficulty that we should go through. Trying to ignore this situation would make us stuck in this vicious circle.
And also, the question of justice is very important. And from the 11th of April, I disagree with Dr. Khaled that I do not, and even the National Congress itself, after its fall, I think this was important. There was no problem. But the basic commitment was to achieve justice after 30 years of their ruling the country with the many violations that have been committed, which we are paying the price for. We were part of that too. From 2005, the first transition failed, the second transition failed. So, and even with the agreement, the justice failed. Thank you, Dr. Khaled, to give you the opportunity. When we talk about ignoring justice, this is part of the political behavior and the result of the illegitimate political ambitions of all parties. They use justice as just a slogan. They pay lip service to it, and they get into their own alliances. What happened with the sitting when it was broken up violently, and the military component, which was accused of committing that violence, and yet in the constitutional document there was talk about an investigation after 2-3 months, nothing happened until the October coup, and the whole question was ignored because it was likely to cause a rift in the alliance between the military component and the civilian component. Now they are talking about an African committee to investigate. It's the same way of thinking. They're reinventing this issue of achieving justice in order to achieve political gains rather than people have their political ambitions, and these are the basic reasons for this. Therefore, the most dangerous thing that can result from this war, that the approach of using the gun to achieve political gains continues. And very simply, unless this attitude changes, you have to change these military entities into political entities, whether the army or the rapid support. They are military entities, and they cannot really qualify to be part of any political entity. So therefore, there are those who are trying to get into alliances in any way or form with one of the parties to gain the upper hand, unless the question of justice achieved according to international norms. Militias are hated everywhere in the world except here in the Sudan. Now they are trying to equate the army with the rapid support, which is a militia, on the basis that they both have the same legitimacy. The international community itself was insisting on integrating the rapid support. They had a different agenda for them. Now they have a different agenda. They're calling for different things. Now, militias are banned everywhere in the world except in Sudan. The international community deals with them differently, and they're trying to give them a political, unless we separate between the gun and the political action and any political situation, the political future of Sudan, this should be the decision by the people of Sudan and not by any elite, whether military or otherwise. And it's the only way to get us out of this situation which we suffered from for many years, or to use the gun or to give power to a militia so that it can have a political presence in the future. So if this continues, the gun will always determine our political fate. We have time for one or two questions to conclude. There is a question about the focus currently on Hamidti and Burhan and the main personalities. But one of the questions says, why the central powers which have affiliations with the outside powers, there are names mentioned, you have not mentioned them. These people are acting from behind closed doors, and their interests are linked to outside powers. Another question says this is not an act of insurgency. This is an act of a rift, or an act of one party or one part of the armed forces rebelling against. And this is part of the current situation. We go to Professor Abdullah, then the first question is not that clear. The second question is, in fact, people who are who gave the rapid force legitimacy, they themselves were part of the Al-Inqadh regime, the salvation, and they considered these friendly forces who used to be disbanded after they finished their job. Law number 17 and afterwards were taken by a regime which you deposed. So why are you sticking to that? You are not sticking to the Islamic movement or the National Congress. Why only sticking to this decision? This is a corrupt way of thinking. The rapid force should be dealt with in similar manner with every other sin that the previous regime had committed. Unless you consider yourself that you take into account all the decisions taken by the previous regime, including the decision to form the rapid support forces. Mr. Khaled Al-Tijani talked about two aspects as a way out, and that is to separate between the military component and the civilian component. This is important regardless of anything else. If we want to stop this war, it is important to respect the humanitarian law. Unfortunately, for many of our colleagues, the occupation of people's houses and violating them, they're trying to find ways to justify that. They say because the army is attacking people's homes. I've never seen such a way of trying to circumvent. This is a violation of the humanitarian law. Nobody can try and find ways around it. Secondly, to stop the escalation, if we're looking for an exit strategy, unfortunately, our colleague in the Taqaddum, when they're talking about the attack on Madani, they don't say the attack on it, they say the expansion of the war. But if you're talking about the expansion of the war, you have to name names and say who expanded the war, who attacked, who carried out these attacks. If we want to talk about solutions and exit strategies. Thank you. Mr. Engineer.
أنا حقول انشقاق، ما عندي مشكلة مع كلمة انشقاق.
I'll use the word as a splinter group. I'll not say insurgent or rebellion. This is a very formal, and as a civilian for 30 years, I was taking a rebellious position against the Inqab government. This is what I call a splinter group from the army, a dissident group. They were made part of the armed forces by law, and they turned against it. I think this is not very accurate. Professor Hassan had an important paper in Ultra Sudan on the question of the state having monopoly or using violence, not the army. Sometimes there are threats to the security that you have to face up to. Any other regular army, similarly to what's happening in the Russian-Ukrainian war, when there are threats and the army's ability to face up to, also the role of of terrorism and how the society can face up to through education and others. This is much bigger than the question of just violence. People used to talk about the state punishing these people. This goes beyond punishment. But in short, when I think this is what, in my opinion, a group becoming a dissident group and a splinter group from the army, not a rebellion or insurgency. I think the liberty and change movement was successful in presenting cases, but not in finding solutions. I will not talk about 2013, September 2013, and the demonstrations, but I'm talking about the participation of the rapid forces in Darfur, the armed struggle in Darfur, and the violations in Jenin and Niala, and was committed previously in many other places in Darfur at the hands of these forces. These are not crimes committed against other people, but the people who lived in those areas. I did not call for justice when the rapid support started attacking areas in the Nile Delta and Khartoum areas. If you go to Sudan, Libya, and other places around Khartoum, you will discover that many people who become internally displaced, they came not only from Sudan, but from neighboring countries because of the armed conflicts. So, if you talk about justice, you have no other way of looking at it in a partial and biased way, because by the very nature of justice and in the transitional justice, the role of the victims and the role of violators is essential to be established. You cannot just be impartial to both, because some of these crimes are systematic, they were planned, and if this continues, it's like reproducing new victims. And when we see the child soldiers recruited by the rapid support and send them to attack the barracks of the armored division or something, this is a crime. And by the way, in wars and the shadow of wars, the criminal law will be very strict so that there are no violations. We have Eritrea, a neighboring country. They fought for 30 years. Until now, you don't find many thieves because the government used to execute thieves immediately, summarily. There are no crimes of rape. If any woman who claims that she was subjected to even sexual harassment, not necessarily rape, they would execute that person without trial. So, therefore, this is an important thing to consider, because people say what is happening is okay because it's happening within the context of a war situation. Never, even wars have laws and regulations which do not allow for this. This is the worst. We know Dr. Khaled who did not do this. He attacked, but when his attack failed, he withdrew. He did not attack anyone's homes, anything. Even the popular movement did not attack major cities in order to attack them. They always followed the tactics of guerrilla warfare, and they did not take their war into Khartoum, for example, that they group within the capital and start attacking. Even rebel forces like this, they are to be questioned. They should respect the authority of the law when they and the occupying forces also they have duties to protect civilians. And finally, I want to mention something regarding international entities. One of the keys, as Mr. Khaled said, to find a solution is it's a national duty to restore the national will. Today, we do not see Britain as, for example, complaining about French or German interference in its internal affairs, despite the huge amount of interest between them. But the national norms for them are clear, and they're all committed to them, and nobody will allow for his personal interests to be more inclined to serve the interests of people abroad. His interest and his national interest are placed above any other consideration. What is even more important than this is the nature of crimes during the Boko Haram attacks, and when Iraq invaded Kuwait, there was property taken from Kuwait to other countries, including Sudan, which is not clear that they were owned by Sudanese or not. These issues constitute a big challenge to international law, similarly to when people talk about the freedom of navigation, etc., etc. There are many countries when properties of people are taken outside. I think the international law should improve itself, because this will be amongst very pressing issues in the law enforcement, and we as people in the world should play a positive role to further stabilizing the situation and to achieve justice, because the issues of justice are not national issues. There's the International Criminal Court to deal with them. In Sudan, there is, yes, we have, sorry to interrupt you, sir. Sorry, we're running out of time. I think I finished. Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Khaled, we will finish with you. Thank you very much, Professor. One of the essential things is how we should put an end to the way of manipulating political activity and using slogans, and hold accountable people who engage in political practice. There is a lot of short-sightedness in Sudan, and the biggest proof of that, Professor Abdullah talked about regarding the legitimacy of the rapid support. It was the product of the previous regime. But this is very problematic. You call yourself revolutionary and you are against the remnants of the former regime, yet you find it totally acceptable to accept the products of that regime, even get into alliances with it. If they're against the previous regime, they should break away from it completely. It's not a question of picking and choosing. If you like something, you accept it. If you don't, you reject it. It's often said that the rapid support force was the result of the legitimacy of the former regime. They were part and parcel of many so-called friendly forces. It was given this status as a result of the struggle within the regime after the Arab Spring and the establishment of the rapid support and giving it all this potential. Omar al-Bashir, the previous president, tried to use them against those who called on him to leave power and to utilize them to secure his political future. Now the people, some people are using the rapid support exactly in the same context. So therefore, any civilian force which is talking about self as a progressive anti-former regime should not deal with one of the products of that regime and use it and reject others. This is one thing. The other thing is it's very important if you want to look for a way out that for the Sudan, that these elites should not continue their monopoly on political action, or they are the only ones who should determine the political future of Sudan. This has been the same for a long time now. These same elites are deciding on behalf of the people. So therefore, any talk about rebuilding and reestablishing the Sudanese state should be with the mandate of people. Any action to determine the future of Sudan should not be carried out by people who do not have any mandate. We are 4 years now into the transitional period. None of these armies, political parties, try to gain legitimacy through elections. They don't have legitimacy by people. They don't even have a mandate from their own grassroots. So therefore, any attempt to re-establish a new state in Sudan, if it's not based on real popular participation and mandate, will not lead to any progress. It will only exacerbate the situation. Also, political reform is very important, whether we're talking about the right, the left, the center. They all need real revision. They need real democratic practices. Otherwise, they will not find any solution. The time has come for the Sudanese people to free itself from those who took them hostage to their political whims and desires. Thank you very much. At the end of this seminar, I would like to thank our panelists, Professor Abdullahi Ibrahim, Mr. Mohamed Faroog Salman, and Dr. Khaled Nour for their valuable contribution. And I would like to thank all the people who took part by asking questions or comments. We look forward to meeting you in the future. Thank you very much. Thank you.